Blessings of the Triple Gem, Theruwan Saranai. Welcome to another Sutta Meditation series, Metta Lab, our weekly slow sessions to continually develop and practice ever increasingly developed metta, loving kindness. Hope this finds you well. Let's begin by paying homage to the Triple Gem. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, and homage to the Noble Sangha. Today, we're continuing to look at liberation of the mind by loving kindness, so mettācetovimutti. And last session, we started looking at this Mettāsahagata Sutta. And of course, we were saying it appears in the Bojjhangas Samyutta of the connected discourses. And we started to look at this, and what we'll find today is that in order to develop this mettācetovimutti, or liberation of the mind by loving kindness, the Buddha asks us to develop metta with the 7 factors of enlightenment, or as he says, develop the bojjhangas accompanied by metta. So we will have quite a deep look or deep dive into how to do this meditation today. Let's first start with how to get the best out of this session. So it's important to keep an open mind that we are looking at the supramundane path of the Buddha, and it is the noble path that leads towards Nibbana. So listen to the Buddha's words fresh, try to understand different meanings of certain Pali words, be okay with Buddha's instructions, and really think about some of these states of mind that are blocking us from developing our metta practice further. Also be okay with not understanding everything. Sometimes it can be quite frustrating. But at the end of the day, it takes us some time. The Buddha says gradual practice, gradual progress, and gradual training. So lean into new Pali words, lean into certain Dhamma parts or Dhamma concepts that we may not be familiar with. Or if something sounds unusual, take some time, maybe away from the session also to look at it. And during this session, be happy with whatever is possible, whatever we can understand. And then we're all learners, we're all seekers on this path. So we come together for this session or watch it afterwards to lean on each other's effort, our energy. And we encourage each other to walk this path. And if there's a meditation session today, I'm not quite sure if we'll have time for the meditation session, depending on how long I go with the explanation. But if there is a meditation session in this session today, then apply one's own examples to the insight pathways. Give oneself the chance to actually clean the mind, calm the mind down, concentrate it, and of course, uplift the mind with loving kindness. So just take the temperature of your mind right now. Is it tired? Is it happy? Is it sad? Is it stressed? Is there ill will? What's it like now? And at the end of the session, do your own temperature again to see, what is it like after this session, after contemplating the Buddha's words? And lastly, have good wishes for everyone. As we've said before, it takes a lot of encouragement and help to come to this path, to stay on this path, and even to come on a session, any kind of Dhamma session, whether it's a retreat or even a Zoom session or something like this on YouTube Live. People help us in order to do that in the past and right now. So let's have gratitude for all the people who have helped us up until this point and anyone on this session today. In our last session, we read out this particular part of the sutta, and I'll just repeat the parts that are pertinent to loving kindness today. The Blessed One said, "Bhikkhus, when wanderers of other sects speak with us, they should be asked, friends, how is the liberation of the mind by loving kindness developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its goal, its final goal? So if you remember, the bhikkhus had gone on Pindapat, and they were a little bit early, so they went into this place, and there were wanderers of other sects. And they sat and greeted them, and then these wanderers of other sects had said that they too cultivate loving kindness and teach loving kindness in the same way that the Buddha does. And so they were questioning why it's different, like what's the difference, what's the distinction. And so the monks had returned from Rice Pindapart and actually come to see the Buddha, as they would usually do, and had recounted this episode of how they met these wanderers. And then they asked the Buddha for his particular take on it. And so the Buddha said, if I could just go down to here, because it's the Blessed One, the Buddha had said the same thing in relation to liberation of the mind by compassion, by altruistic joy, and also by equanimity. So the Buddha says, being asked thus, those wanderers would not be able to reply, and further they would meet with vexation. For what reason? Because that would not be within their domain. I do not see anyone, bhikkhus, in this world with its devas, Mara and Brahma, in this generation with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans, who could satisfy the mind with an answer to these questions, except the Tathagata or a disciple of the Tathagata or one who has heard it from them. So Buddha's making a very strong point here, as we said last week. And so I just wanted to come back to these words here: destination, culmination, fruit, and final goal. So in Pali, this is kingatika, so it's destination. What this really means is, where does this practice of loving kindness or liberation of the mind by loving kindness, where does it lead to? What kind of rebirth, if any? And King Parama is culmination, which is also, what is its highest peak? Like, what is its highest apex? Like this particular practice. And then King Pala, so this is, what is its fruit? So what the Buddha is saying, what is its result? What is its benefit of actually cultivating this? So these are the types of things the Buddha is saying that they would not be able to answer. They would meet with vexation. And then the last one is King Pariyosana, so its final goal. So Buddha is really saying, well, what is its end? What is its conclusion or perfection? And these are the things that the Buddha is saying, well, these particular wanderers would not be able to answer these things because it's not within their domain. And really what we're seeing here is the Buddha is knowing that what the Buddha teaches is this supramundane path, this noble path, the path that leads to nibbana, complete cessation of suffering. And Buddha can say that because Buddha is someone who has realized perfect enlightenment. And in the case of wanderers, he could see that they haven't. And so they aren't able to reply to the extent that the Buddha could. Now, what's really interesting, and I'll just go to the next slide, there are different times that the bhikkhus on Pindapat have met with wanderers or different groups of people who practice certain things. And they've also had, I'm not going to read this out, but they've also had the same kind of question in relation to the 5 hindrances and also the bojjhangas, the 7 factors of enlightenment. They've met with a particular group of wanderers of other sects, and they've said the same thing, that in their language, the ascetic Gautama teaches the Dhamma to abandon the hindrances and also the corruptions of the mind that weaken wisdom, and also develop correctly the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then they also say, we too teach the Dhamma to our disciples of the same thing. And then they ask the same kind of question, what here is the distinction, the disparity, the difference? And so they go back and speak and recount that particular episode to the Buddha. And the Buddha comes up with a very, very similar thing, that in the case of the hindrances and the enlightenment factors, this is from the Pariyaya Sutta. This is a really, really wonderful sutta. We won't go through it here, but it's a very wonderful sutta because it's very clear, just like with this bojjhangas and metta, going to the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, that it's not possible for those that train in a different tradition to know how to do these things. And the Buddha explicitly explains the distinction and the difference. And so that's where you see the supreme knowledge of the Buddha come into the forefront. And especially when we learn the instructions and we practice those instructions and we develop the mind in this way, we also see that. We see the Dhamma, and in seeing the Dhamma, we see the Buddha. And when we see the Buddha, we see the Dhamma, and vice versa. So it's really, really powerful. So I thought it was interesting just to share that there are other instances, such as with the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment, that when the Buddha explains it, through the mastery of his instructions, it becomes very clear, hands down, the Buddha knows this pathway to ultimate liberation. And in the last session, we also looked at Venerable Sariputta's explanation of what is liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So he says it is loving kindness since it treats kindly, namely by rejecting the case of all beings, all living beings, their oppression for their non-oppression, by rejecting their injury for their non-injury, by rejecting their disappointment for their non-disappointment, by rejecting their deprivation for their non-deprivation, by rejecting their harassment for their non-harassment, with the thought, let all beings be free from enmity and not bear hostility, have pleasure and not disappointment, have happiness and not pain in their minds. It is the mind that perceives this Dhamma. It is liberation, since it's liberated from all obsession by ill will. Loving kindness and mind and liberation. This is the liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So we see a very clear stance, which is very similar to some of those suttas we looked at last week, where the Buddha says, when it's liberated by loving kindness, it's free of all obsession from ill will at that point. That doesn't mean completely when you come out of the meditation, but in the meditation, when it's developed to this particular peak of liberation of the mind by loving kindness, then it's free of all obsession by ill will. And that's where it comes into the forefront, that when one wishes loving kindness to all living beings, it is free of oppression, it's free of injury, it's free of disappointment, it's free of deprivation, those sorts of things, free of harassment, because one would bear no ill will to any other living being. So let's continue with the sutta. And how, bhikkhus, is the liberation of the mind by loving kindness developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. This is sati sambojjhanga, accompanied by loving kindness. Enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, so Dhamma vichaya sambojjhanga, accompanied by loving kindness. Enlightenment factor of energy, virya sambojjhanga, accompanied by loving kindness. Enlightenment factor of rapture, piti sambojjhanga, accompanied by loving kindness. Enlightenment factor of tranquility, passaddhi sambojjhanga, accompanied by loving kindness. Enlightenment factor of concentration, samadhi sambojjhanga, accompanied by loving kindness. And the enlightenment factor of equanimity, accompanied by loving kindness. So that is upekkha sambojjhanga, based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. So clearly, what the Buddha is saying with this is that in order to develop mettācetovimutti, so liberation of the mind by loving kindness, we need to develop the bojjhangas accompanied by metta, which we can also say is metta with bojjhangas. And it's not clearly understood by many who look at this sutta why the Brahma Viharas. So we know that in this sutta, it's not just loving kindness, it's also compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. So many are not really that clear about why the bojjhangas are connected with these Brahma Viharas. Why is it important? Why do we go to liberation that way? And there is a very, very good reason why it works this way, and why we only reach liberation by activating bojjhangas, arousing and developing the bojjhangas. So let's look at 2 particular suttas to remind us, because we have been through this before. I remember last session I said, just revisit the Bojjhanga series in terms of particularly Bojjhanga 2. And it talks about like what nourishes bojjhangas. And one of the suttas I referred to in Bojjhanga 2 talk, but the other one is the Avijja Sutta. So in the Avijja Sutta, which is the sutta on ignorance, and it talks about what is the nourishment for the pathway. So on the left, we have the pathway that leads to ignorance. So it's the pathway that brings us back into samsara. So we're not free of samsara. And on the right, we have the pathway, the insight pathway or wisdom pathway that leads to true knowledge and liberation, which will lead to nibbana. So when you look at this, if we just take, for example, the wrong path, when we associate with bad people, then we hear the wrong Dhamma. So we don't hear about these insight pathways and the meaning of the words that the Buddha says and how to practice to get out of samsara. We might think we do, but ultimately we don't. And so what happens is we don't have the conviction towards the Buddha's words. We prefer our own insight or prefer practicing something else. Therefore, we're not wisely contemplating the Buddha's precise words and insight pathways. And what arises from that nourishes the lack of mindfulness and clear comprehension. So we're not seeing clearly the distinction between even the pleasure and pain path. And then when it comes to the sense faculties, we don't see the danger in terms of restraining the sense faculties. And we know for metta, loving kindness, sense restraint is very important. And the only reason you would sense restraint or put the security guard up is because you see the danger from what the Buddha has said. And as a result of that, you would know that it's very important to have the 3 kinds of good conduct. But in this case, when we don't restrain the sense faculties, we have the 3 kinds of misconduct. So body, speech, and mind. So we could say dasa akusala, the 10 kinds of wrong conduct through body, speech, and mind. And what that does is it's the nourishment for the 5 hindrances. And so that nourishes ignorance. So that's the wrong path. But when we look at this other path, associating with good people. So if we associate with Buddha's words and those that meticulously explain the Buddha's words and encourage to penetrate the Buddha's words through meaning and understanding, we get to hear that Dhamma. We get to hear about the insight pathways. What happens is our conviction, our saddha, gets aroused. And that's because we see the Dhamma. And so when that happens, we have saddha towards Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, those that practice. And of course, we have conviction towards the Buddha's enlightenment and what he manifests, or he is the manifestation of the Dhamma. And of course, he encourages us to wisely contemplate. So we're wisely contemplating with right view. So it comes from the Buddha's words and we wisely contemplate them. And so we have mindfulness and clear comprehension. With mindfulness and clear comprehension, that's the nourishment for restraint of the sense faculty. So we know that even from the Karaniya Metta Sutta, how important that is. And also painful practice with slow realization, very, very evident. Otherwise, our concentration, our ability to hold at bay the unskilled states, they all come back again. And so we know that security guard is very important. And of course, we're able to maintain the 3 kinds of good conduct. We're able to establish the 4 establishments of mindfulness, so satipatthana. And then what do we see here? That is the nourishment for the 7 factors of enlightenment, bojjhanga. And what is that the nourishment for? True knowledge and liberation. So jnana vimukti. So that's why when we talk about liberation of the mind by loving kindness, we need the bojjhangas as the food, as the nourishment to get to liberation. Now, we also see here the connection that if we have hindrances, and this will be very key when we start looking at our basis point for developing metta with bojjhangas, if the hindrances are there, if we allow them to arise, then we don't get the 7 factors of enlightenment. But if we subdue the hindrances through our meditation pathway, then we have the ability to arouse the 7 factors of enlightenment. So this is very key, and we've spoken about that during the Bojjhanga series. So hindrances, if they're active, no bojjhangas. But if we subdue the hindrances, then bojjhangas can develop and arise. So here we see very clearly that the bojjhangas are the nutriment for knowledge and liberation. And hence why this Mettāsahagata Sutta, why we are asked to develop metta with bojjhangas in order to get to mettācetovimutti, this liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So the second sutta that I wanted to just touch on, I've already explained this pathway, but this was just an excerpt from the Kundalini Sutta, also in the Bojjhanga Samyutta. We've referenced this in the Bojjhanga talk, number 2. And here it just goes again and repeats that in order to nourish liberation, true knowledge and liberation, we need the 7 factors of enlightenment. We need the satipatthana to nourish the 7 factors of enlightenment. We need the 3 kinds of good conduct in order to establish mindfulness, the 4 establishments, and we need sense restraint. So that's pretty clear. So it's repeated, and there are other suttas that are similar. What I find is when we see Buddha repeating the same thing, it gives us confidence. It's not just a one-off where he says these things, it's repeated. So it gives us confidence to practice it. And then the other thing to comment on is really about the Noble Path. So we have spoken at length about the Noble Eightfold Path, and we know it begins with right view. We develop the right thought. From that, we get the right speech, right action, right livelihood. And of course, right effort works with the right view to make sure we arouse the energy to make these things happen, to refrain from the unskilled state and to develop these wholesome ones. And right mindfulness makes sure that we are attending to that right view and have a mind to using the effort in that way. And of course, the result is right concentration. So this Noble Eightfold Path becomes the Noble Tenfold Path, which we can simply call Noble Path. So from the right concentration, what we get is the right knowledge, which is it's like sammajnana. So sometimes we also call jnana similar to wisdom. And with this knowledge, it's very similar to direct knowledge. So the knowledge and the insight we get from meditating, developing the mind on these insight pathways, we get the same knowledge that the Buddha has realized. So some of it, maybe not all of it, but some of it, of these meditations. And in cultivating metta with bojjhangas, in order to realize liberation of the mind by loving kindness, we are doing that. We are developing the knowledge in that way. And so what do we get as a result of that is right liberation. So this is how you see bojjhangas, Noble Path, how they are intertwined. It's the same thing. Often people ask, what is meditation? And of course, there are many mundane explanations of meditation. But in the Buddha's supramundane Noble Path, it is this. It is either development of the bojjhangas or it is the Noble Path. Very, very clear. And they both lead towards realizing nibbana, the cessation of craving, the cessation of suffering. Okay, so how do we develop the liberation of the mind by loving kindness? Oh, actually, let me go back one moment. I wanted to just cover these words at the end. So the Buddha lists out the 7 factors of enlightenment accompanied by loving kindness. And at the end, he says, based upon seclusion, dispassion, cessation, maturing and release. And we spoke about this in the Bojjhanga series, but I wanted to touch on it again. So in Pali, this seclusion is viveka nisitam. So sometimes we refer to that as solitude or seclusion. And the meaning behind this is we need, as we've said before, kaya viveka, so the physical seclusion. So we're away from people, away from our activities. We put down our responsibilities and allocated time. And chitta viveka, which is our mental seclusion. So we start to develop the mind in accordance with the Buddha's instructions. So when we develop the bojjhangas accompanied by metta, this leads to the liberation of the mind because we've taken seclusion. This is one important thing. So if we think about, can we do this while we're at work? No, because we're meant to be working. Can we do that while we're attending to our children or looking after our parents, our elderly parents? No. So it's very clear that in order to go to liberation, it's very important to have some kaya viveka and chitta viveka, so this seclusion. The second term is dispassion, so viraga nisitam. And this dispassion is also, like viraga is also translated as fading of lust or cessation of lust. And whatever meaning we give to it, whether it's lust or greed, it's basically dispassion towards, in this case, when we talk about metta, dispassion towards the physical nutriment or the form or whatever sensual pleasures that are based on the physical nutriment or form. So when we say dispassion, it means we abandon it. So there's dispassion that arises. And then cessation, so we know this word is nirodha, so nirodha nisitam. So cessation we know as ending, stopping, terminating. So we're talking really about the cessation of craving, because the origin of suffering is craving. So we're talking about the cessation of craving, having seen the truth about the physical nutriment or the form. So in our meditation, we're looking at the true nature of the physical nutriment or the form that we misapprehend through our sensual pleasures, whether it's people, food, those sorts of things. So when we see the cessation of craving, when we actually realize that, even in our meditation to a certain level, at that point we realize or understand a certain level of cessation of suffering. So that's quite important. And then it says maturing in release. So this is vosagga parinamim. And this vosagga is parinamim is really also maturing in relinquishment. So we're prepared to let it go, giving it all up, because we've seen the true nature. We've seen that it's not what we thought it was. It's been lying to us. There's deception there, and so we want nibbana instead. So this means basically we cross over from the wrong path that nourishes hindrances and desire and all those sorts of things, and we develop towards the fulfillment of the noble path, which is nourished by bojjhangas. And so that's how we lead towards mettācetovimutti, liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So hopefully that helps to understand why the Buddha uses those particular words. And we'll see this very strongly in our meditation. So we need to start with painful practice with slow realization. This is one of the ways that we go to immeasurable metta. So in this case today, we're not going to immeasurable metta. So we're not going to metta upamana, but we're going to use this as the basis for going to mettācetovimutti. So what I thought I'd do is I'd run through the insight pathway that we already know and add on the bits that help us to go to liberation of the mind by loving kindness. And then I want to circle back and talk about how these enlightenment factors arise and get developed as we do this insight pathway. And then the last part that I'll do is talking about how we fortify metta, loving kindness, this cultivation of metta, with these 7 factors of enlightenment. So we start off with painful practice with slow realization. So we know that we have 5 different ways of selecting a meditation object. So we know that we can contemplate unattractiveness of the body. So asubha, anupassikaya, so that's unattractiveness of the body. We know that there are different ways of doing that. We also know that we can perceive the repulsiveness of food, so ahare, patikula sanya. There's also perceiving non-delight in the entire world, so sabaloke, anapurata sanya. Also contemplation of impermanence in all conditioned phenomena, so sabbe sankaresu, anicca, anupassi. And then the 5th one is we have a very well-established perception of death internally. So this is the marana sanya. So I'm not going to explain each one again because we've gone through this through multiple Metta Labs. But what I'll use today is if we take, for example, unattractiveness of the body. So asubha sanya regarding the body as part of explaining this insight pathway. So one of the ways to do that is to look at this body as a sack of impurities. So from the Ganda Sutta, and it has 9 holes. So 2 holes in the eyes, 2 holes in the nose, 2 holes in the ears, 1 hole in the mouth, and then 2 lower holes for urination and defecation. So with this first step, we contemplate. We contemplate very deeply to lay the foundation to see this physical nutriment or this form very, very clearly. And of course, you can also contemplate food, as I said before. But in the case of this body, we don't lightly look at it, because if we lightly look at it, then what happens is we're not fully seeing the true nature, in this case, of the body, of this physical nutriment. So we know it doesn't work if we still look at other people's bodies, our own body, and think, oh, there's beauty. Oh, it's so pleasing. Oh, it's so attractive. What we need to do is lay this, if we're building a house, a Metta house, with the peak being the enlightenment practice fully developed, the first level is really getting this perception right. So our perception is wrong at the moment when we think there's beauty, when we think there's attractiveness, when we think that there is something that is pleasing. And so one has to really look quite clearly. So say, for example, when we are sick, what comes out of the nostrils? Of course, things like snot, maybe other things. What comes out of the mouth? Maybe phlegm, maybe blood, maybe other dark things. Who knows? Same with the ears, same with the eyes. And then, of course, like if we're gravely sick, then there are other things coming out of those other holes. So most of the time, when we look at this body, we look in the mirror and we brush our hair and we clean ourselves up and we make ourselves up and we dress ourselves and we start to think, oh, there's beauty. And then other people say to us, oh, you're looking really good today. You're so beautiful. You're so attractive. So the idea, and we do that to other people too, the idea here is to correct that view, especially in the meditation where we are free of our duties, free of being bothered by other things. We're alone. We're meditating. We want to see the truth. So it's very important to do that. If we do this correctly, what happens is we would not have any kind of sensual desire towards this body or other people's bodies. So if there's no sensual desire, that means the hindrance of sexual desire is subdued. That's a very important thing. If that's subdued, then there's no ill will, there's no sloth and torpor, there's no restlessness and worry, there's no doubt. So because all these hindrances are linked. So that's how we reach the first absorption. So we reach the first jhana, because we know when the hindrances are subdued, the ability to enter into the higher concentration, the first jhana is there. And that is highly dependent on getting this first step right in terms of what our meditation object is. So when we reach the first jhana, we wouldn't be clinging to this body because we've seen it as a sack of impurities with things flowing out from it which are repulsive, not attractive, not pleasing. So then what we do, we build the second layer of the Metta house, which is this first establishment of mindfulness. So we know this is Kayanupassana. Now, we know when we build this second layer, it's like reinforcing this house. What do we use? We use the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. So been through this before, and we meditate on the arising of the form and the passing away of the form, or the physical nutriment. So say, for example, usually we love our own bodies. We love other people's bodies, people we like. So if we take the example of maybe our own bodies, we look in the mirror, what do? We seek delight. We welcome. So we say, oh, I'm looking good today. I just had a haircut. Oh, the creams that I'm using are working. Oh, my skin, when I use this body cream, it's really good. So we welcome it, and then we remain holding, thinking, yes, tomorrow when I look in the mirror, it's still going to be great because I'm doing all these things. So craving is there. If there's craving, then there's delight. So even in our mind, we add a further value to it. We add this value that, oh, this body is very valuable. And all of us know we day in, day out do that. We have this value to it. We dress it. We go looking for clothes to make it look good. We put jewelry, all kinds of things. So I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying look at how the mind deals with this physical nutriment, our own bodies. It's highly attached to it, and it keeps developing that every day. So when it does that, then there's clinging. So this is something where this idea of beauty, this idea of attractiveness, something that's pleasing to us, is locked in. And our thoughts regarding this body are quite deeply set. So when you think about the perversion, like vipallasa, this is the antidote to the perversion, because what this perversion of subha, attractiveness, pleasing, beauty, it happens at the perception level, it happens at the thought level, and it happens at the view level. So at the perception level, when we look in the mirror, we perceive, oh, I'm looking good today. And I expect to look good tomorrow because I'm using all the right things and I'm holding aging and all these things at bay. And so our thinking is always around how to keep the body this way. And also, I'll keep getting my haircuts. I'll keep using these creams. I'll keep looking for external endorsement from people to say I'm attractive, that this body is good. I'm looking after it. I can still maintain it. So then it becomes deeply embedded when it becomes the view. Yes, my body is like this and I can fix it and I can maintain this beauty. And you see this in the world. So it becomes more complicated. It becomes Ozempic. It becomes Botox. It becomes plastic surgery. It becomes all these kinds of different things when it becomes deeply embedded, because such a person really is trying to maintain that view. And it's being challenged. You know, we are all being challenged because we're subject to change. We're subject to the aging phenomena, all of us. But say we have these perversions at the perception level, at the thought level, at the view level, then if we cling to it, then we think, oh, it's really worth it. So we put money into the bother box for these birth miles, thinking, yes, it's worth it to have another eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind for whatever has happened that gives me this kind of pleasure, that this, if I have this body, it will give me some kind of pleasure. So it's worth it. That's why I'm putting money into this money box for a future birth. So what happens at the point of death? Well, at the point of death, we have money in the money box. We have this wrong view, deeply set that it's worth it. Then we come to birth. So we go towards birthing another body. If we birth another body or some kind of existence, then there's aging and death. If there's aging and death, then there's sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and despair. So you can see that this is the arising of suffering, because this is the whole mass of suffering. So at the craving level, we thought, oh, this is great. But what do we get at the end? We get the arising of suffering. So this is something that when you see it, you think, I don't want to do this. This is a bad deal. And then we realize everybody else is doing this. If they perceive this in the same way, let's run the same recipe that the Buddha has given us, what is the result for them? It's birth to birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and despair. So in the meditation, we pause and we think, so with this birth, what did I do in my last one? This is the recipe that we ran in our last birth to come into this birth. So this body is the vipaka kamma, the result of running this. Now we ask, do we want to run that again? Like if we have mindfulness regarding this body, do we want to run this again? And, to get suffering. All we get is suffering because of our craving for this body. Do I want this again? And the answer, of course, should be a very strong no. We want to cut something in this dependent origination. Cut some of these things. And so we say we don't want to take delight because this body only ends in suffering. So we say we don't take delight, we don't welcome, and we don't remain holding. So if we don't do these things, there's no craving. If there's no craving, then there's a cessation of delight. There's no nandi. We haven't valued it. If we haven't valued it at the level of delight, then there's no clinging. So there's no fuel for that. Our thoughts are not going to be around how great this body is. If that's the case, then we're not putting money into the money box saying, let me have these birth miles for another eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Let me not do that. And if there's no money in the money box at the point of death, then I'm not going to birth. If I'm not going to birth, then there's no aging and death, and there's no whole mass of suffering. So what we see is the passing away of suffering. So samudaya, arising or origin, atangama, passing away, and in essence also nirodha, cessation. So very powerful when we develop this particular part of the meditation. So that's level 2 of our metta house. If we do this particular step, the kayanupassana, so the arising and passing away very strongly, and we're leaning towards cessation, we enter into the first abiding, so dibbavahara, so heavenly abode. So we've said before, this is the 4 jhanas. So we were contemplating from the first jhana, we were contemplating about this kayanupassana. When we do that, that means we probably would go into either 2nd, 3rd or 4th jhana, basically. What this means is it doesn't really matter. You don't need to theorize or really worry about which jhana you're in when you're learning this meditation. The main thing is that you have the concentration. And what you realize with the leaning towards cessation, having done the kayanupassana, this 2nd level of metta, of building the metta house, is that this is the first taste of nibbana, like the real taste of nibbana. And I've said that before. And that's because before we were taking the sensual pleasures and we're thinking, oh, this is so good. Like this experience is so good with this body and other people's bodies. This is so good with the food. So whatever the physical nutriment is that is based on these sensual pleasures, we really valued that. And now when we're in dibbavahara, this heavenly abode, we're realizing, my goodness, I don't need the physical nutriment. I can experience this amazing rapture, happiness in the mind, or this very, very concentrated state, very calm state. Imperturbable state would be 4th jhana. So those are within the vicinity of the heavenly abode. So some people, they experience it just simply the rapture, and so it's just flowing through the body because of contemplating correctly. Other people just are so happy in the mind, and other people just, the mind does not shake and it's just so calm. So that's dibbavahara. So when we're in that particular spot, then what we need to do, the next step is this first right striving, and it's really quite straightforward. If we've had this first taste of nibbana, we don't want to come out of that. We don't want anything to bring us out of that because we've done all the hard work in the first step, the 3rd step, and reaching these jhanas. So in this step, it's really saying to ourselves, let me not fall from this state. Let me not allow any sensual thoughts to arise, and therefore no ill will thoughts to arise, and therefore also no harming thoughts to arise. But the main one is no sensual thoughts. And the reason why that's possible is because in the first level, we realize actually this physical nutriment, this form, is actually unattractive or repulsive. We've seen its true nature. So of course we're not going to allow sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, and harming thoughts. And we've realized with the arising and passing away of the physical nutriment, it's a bad deal. All we get is suffering. So again, we're not going to have sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, harming thoughts. So that's the first right striving. When we have that, what it's really saying is we're not going to have the coveting. We're not going to have the coveting for any sensual things because we've seen it. We've seen the truth. And so at that point, we build the 3rd part of the house, the metta house, which is this first wonderful and marvelous idea. So we know we need to contemplate the noble truth of suffering. The reason why we need to do that is because from birth to birth, we have the taints, and the main one is the sensual desire taint, or the taint of sensual desire. The taint of sensual desire has this post-perception of happiness, of pleasure. And what we don't realize is even in this birth, when we experience so-called pleasure, having taken sensual pleasures, having glorified or indulged in this body or other people's bodies, once it's happened, we believe in that pleasure. And we've forgotten about birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. We've completely forgotten it. And so that's why this 3rd layer of building the Metta house, it's really important to make sure we haven't misapprehended and not for that idea of pleasure to come back in, because it's very compelling. As we've seen in looking at the third step, we're very compelled because of craving. And so when we look at this, what we do is to preempt and to reinforce our meditation. We say, okay, let me contemplate what the Buddha said about suffering. So we need to deeply contemplate that. So when we contemplate birth is suffering, it's not a light thing. Like if we really want to go to mettācetovimutti, we really need to contemplate it really well, not kid ourselves. So we think birth is suffering. So Buddha has said, suffering happens right from the conception. When we go into the mother's womb, is that really fun? Like, is it pleasurable? Of course it's not, because we're actually in the mother's womb, which is right near where the mother's urine and excrement sac is. So it's literally like we're in a smelly toilet. We're not there just for one moment. We're there for a number of months, up to 10 months. So when we contemplate that, we need to realize that. So that's part of birth is suffering. That wanting to come into existence, come to birth is suffering. When we're born, is that fun? Do we come out giggling? Do we come out smiling? No, we come out covered in all kinds of things that were in the womb. We come out with all kinds of things that need to be cleaned off before it's placed on our mother's breast. And we are screaming and we are unhappy. And so it starts from there. And we can't speak, we can't communicate our needs. We're completely dependent on our parents for food, for cleaning ourselves up, for taking care of us. And when we can speak, we're told what to do. We're told off. We're told when we can't play anymore. We're told when we go to sleep. And then as we grow up, we experience different things. We experience having to go to school. We can't play all the time. We experience when we don't get the toys that we want. We experience when we have to eat things that we don't want. We have to experience having to sit for exams, having to do assignments. We have to experience bullying. We have to experience arguments with our parents. We have to experience being told that we can't go out and what time to come back. We have to experience learning to do different things, from driving to having to get a part-time job to earning money. And then we're told to get a skill or a trade or to go to university. We're told all these different things. Then we have to get a job. We're told you should get married, you should have children. We're told that it'll all be fine. But then we might experience breakups. We might experience problems in our relationships at work. We might experience disagreements over preferences. We might get into fistfights. We might get put into jail for certain things. We might get fined. We might have to pay taxes, or we do have to pay taxes. We might be thrown out of the country. We might be ostracized from our family, and so on and so forth. You know, there's so many things. We might worry about our children. We might get divorced. We might be ostracized from our friends. We might be betrayed. We might have things stolen. All of that is part of birth is suffering. Then we contemplate aging as suffering. So we contemplate about losing our balance, losing our memory, declining eyesight, losing our taste buds, poor hearing, being ignored as part of aging, being people not wanting to listen to us, people not wanting to visit and see us, all kinds of different things associated with aging, many things that the Buddha describes about what happens to the body as well. Then sickness. So these are the sicknesses that we are born with, just like aging. The minute we're born, we age. The minute we are born, we have sickness. So hunger, thirst, having to urinate, having to defecate. So in Deva realms, they don't have that, but in human realm, and we do. And all the different illnesses that come from being attacked, from the climate, from all the things to do with the different organs of the body, all the different kinds of illnesses that can come. And then, of course, death. And, you know, death is this thing that we never really want to talk about, but it's very, very strong. that we see that when we lose our pets, when we lose our loved ones, when we lose, ultimately, when we will inevitably lose this body. And so we misapprehended, thinking, no, I can persevere, I can find a way. And even now, people are saying we can have longevity, we can turn back the clock or stop the clock. But the truth is that that's not true. And so this is part of this contemplation of this first wonderful and marvelous idea, because this is really compelling, that being the physical nutriment, these bodies, it's so evident that we're all death-bound. It's not just you and me. It's all living beings. And so when we meditate on this, we have no doubt that we are subject with birth to aging, sickness, and death. And it is suffering. That's the point. It is suffering. We experience pain. We experience sadness because of it. We experience sorrow. We experience lamentation, grief. We experience suffering when we're separated from what we find pleasing, these other bodies, food. We experience union with what is displeasing when we're away from it, and we never get what we want because of this death-bound nature. So it is suffering. There's no pleasure here. And everyone is party to that. We're all in the same boat. So what that leads us to is this determination for the truth. So when we see that we've been deceived by these sensual pleasures based on the physical nutriment, this form, we realize, well, what's the truth? What's not lying to us? What's not deceiving us? And we know from the Buddha's words that it is Nibbana. And so our determination for the truth is our determination for Nibbana. And this overcomes like the flood of sensual desires. We wouldn't be flooded because we realize, having built our Metta house to this level, we realize, yes, Buddha must be right. So we have the desire for Nibbana. That's how we reach the concentration due to desire, because it's very strong for us. If we've meditated on these steps very well, then in our meditation, it's such an aha moment and such a relief to realize, I want Nibbana. I desire Nibbana. I wish for Nibbana. And we reach this concentration due to desire because of that. So at that point, we don't have any poison in us that thinks that the physical nutriment is pleasing, that it's attractive, that it's our recourse to come back again. It's been subdued. And we know from our meditation that we protect this concentration by restraining our sense faculties, because we don't want any kind of covetousness to come back in and for us to have sadness because of it. So this is the first part of the meditation, or this is the meditation so far. Now, the next part to add to it is the contemplation of impermanence in order to reach liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So some people would say, well, when we go through this, isn't this the same as when we look at the noble truth of suffering? There is a distinction, because when we look at the noble truth of suffering, which is back here, first wonderful and marvelous idea, the emphasis here is suffering. We're not really paying attention to the impermanence part. But when we come to this part, we are really, really looking at it. So we ask ourselves, if we are born, we know we're subject to aging. Like, it's so evident. The minute we're born, we start to age. We have birthdays every year. When we look at ourselves in the mirror, when we're young, it's not so obvious. But as we start to age, in the sense of how most people would think about aging, where it becomes quite significant. But actually, we age each and every day. We grow in height, in weight. Our weight oscillates. Our features change. Our skin does change. All those different types of things. Our hearing changes, our eyesight changes, all of it. So if we know we're subject to aging, we really need to contemplate this aging phenomenon. So that means really contemplating really well. Now, if you're really skilled in the meditation, it's like even when you sit in a chair, you know that there is something that is aging. We can't sit in the chair for very long. We need to move. And sometimes we need to stand up and go for a walk. But even in those postures, we know that we can't do those things for very long either. We need to change that posture as well. Like if we stand for too long, we feel like we need to sit down. So that's part of the aging phenomena. Also important to understand, if you're skilled in the meditation and you've done the Cetovimutti Sutta, one can also contemplate that aging phenomena involves contact. So when you understand that, say, for example, the eye is already aging. What we're looking at is also aging, and eye consciousness is aging. And that applies to all the 5 senses and actually 6 senses. So at that level, that is really what the aging phenomena is. So our predicament is quite dire when it comes to aging phenomena. Then we contemplate, if we are subject to aging, then we must also be subject to sickness and death. So we know this, we've contemplated it. It's very true. So you contemplate about sickness, you contemplate about death again. Then we contemplate, is there any permanency if we're subject to death? Now, the reason why we do that is because within our society, we don't pay attention to death. Where is our focus? It's on life, on living. And what this meditation is really saying at this point is to really look at that. Because what we do in our daily life is fix it. If something goes wrong, like we lose our job, we go look for another one. If our partner says, let's get a divorce, and we end up getting divorced, we go look for another partner. Same with a relationship. So if we lose a friend, then we go, okay, well, let me depend on another friend. So we don't like to look at death. And even in the sense of death, something in us refuses to look at it, to really see it as the truth, as something that if you know this truth, there's some relief from it. So in that sense, we don't see that it's impermanent. We always keep thinking, I can fix it. Permanency has this way. That's why consciousness has this simile of a magician doing a magic trick. So in the meditation, having contemplated, if we're born, we're subject to aging. So if we're aging, we're also subject to sickness and death. So where is the permanency if we're subject to death? Right? So you say there is no permanency. So in the meditation, we say there is no permanency. So then we contemplate, but what are we grasping onto as a permanent perception of self? And so the answer there when we ask this question in our meditation is we're holding on to the physical nutriment, the form. So with our same example, we hold on to our own bodies. That's what we're holding on to. That's what we're grasping onto as our perception of a permanent self. So in the previous birth, we thought we could hold on to it. We thought we can live with this body, but then we experienced death. But because we had this wrong view about permanency, we wanted to reconstruct and have another one. But look at where we are again. We're still subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. So all we're going to come back to, if we still hold on to this physical nutriment, is another physical nutriment that is flawed, that is subject to aging, sickness, and death. If we do this contemplation properly, we reach equanimity in terms of we have some kind of detachment, some kind of, I don't want this physical nutriment. I don't want to do this again. And so there's a detachment towards the physical nutriment. We have this upekkha that arises. And so that's how we go towards the liberation of the mind by loving kindness. These Brahma Viharas are linked, and these enlightenment factors are also kicking in. So that's the meditation. It's not that difficult. Like I said, it's based on painful practice with slow realization. And instead of going to immeasurable metta, we actually do this contemplation on impermanence on this particular slide, and we reach liberation of mind by loving kindness. So at that point, what it's really saying is we're not going to come back to the form. We're not going to allow consciousness to come back to the form. We are equanimous to it. And what we're also saying is we don't want the mother's womb, really. That's actually the fruit of that. And at the same time, it's also saying, yes, I give it up. In the meditation, I give it up. And so we're not going that wrong way. So, with the physical nutriment, we say we're going the wrong way. So in this case, we're going to liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So it's a beautiful meditation. So now I want to circle back. And I probably won't be able to go through the fortification part, but I want to go back and talk about the bojjhangas so you see how they get aroused and developed. So when we do the first step, so we pick our meditation object, and as I was saying, we see in this instance the unattractiveness of the body. So we contemplate the body as this sack of impurities with 9 holes, and we contemplate what comes out of those holes, and we actually see it's unclean, it's impure, and so our perception is corrected. When we do that, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness starts to arise. And I say that, and I'm going to reference as I go through these bojjhangas, the Sila Sutta, because I really like the Buddha's words in this. It really highlights how it arises. So in that sutta, the Buddha says, dwelling withdrawn, both physically and mentally, one recollects the Dhamma and thinks it over. So you think about it, with this first step, we've taken our meditation object. So in this case, it's this body is a sack of impurities with 9 holes, and we're contemplating the unclean and impure things that are coming out of it. So we are contemplating the Dhamma and we're thinking it over. And so this arouses the establishment of the factor of enlightenment factor of mindfulness. So the Sati Sambojjhanga. So when that happens, we get the right view. And then also we go to the first jhana. So you start to see that the enlightenment factor of rapture is aroused. So it doesn't mean it's fully developed, but it's aroused. Then when we do the first establishment of mindfulness, so this is the kayanupassana, about the arising and passing away phenomena, what happens is, if we go to the Sila Sutta again, the Buddha says, dwelling thus mindfully, one discriminates the Dhamma with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation or full inquiry. So this is the Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga. This is how it gets aroused. And the words the Buddha uses for Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga, this investigation of Dhamma Bojjhanga, he says, pa vichinati. So we discriminate. So that means we're looking at the arising phenomena. So as we saw in this particular side, we start to look at this samudaya. So we know in our meditation, painful practice with slow realization, we did that. Then when the Buddha says, we examine the Dhamma with wisdom, that is pa vicharati. So we examine the arising and passing away. So in the meditation, we said, how do we birth this particular body? Well, we ran this recipe. Do I want to do that? No, I don't. And so we ran this this atangama, this passing away insight pathway. So that's the second part of the Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga. And then the third part is when we make an investigation and a full inquiry. Having done so, this is the parivimangsama pajati. What we come to understand with the right view, having seen the arising and passing away of what? Of suffering, then we realize we have a deeper level of understanding about this dire predicament, not just for ourselves, but for all of us. For all of us, we're in the same boat. And so having seen that, at this stage, we lean towards cessation. Like when we do this part of the meditation correctly, we lean towards cessation. And at that point, we want to break one of these dependent origination links. We don't want to continue. We want to stop dependent origination, knowing this is the recipe. So what we can see here is that this gets aroused and we start to develop this Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga. So that becomes quite strong. So that happens at the Kayanupassana level. And of course, Sati Sambojjhanga is also reinforced. It starts to get more developed as we do this third step. And as I was saying about the enlightenment factor of rapture, this is the Piti Sambojjhanga. It starts to get aroused when we enter into the first jhana. But what the Buddha says in the Sila Sutta is about the Virya Sambojjhanga. Sorry, let me go to the Virya Sambojjhanga first. He talks about when we discriminate, examine and make an investigation, our energy is aroused without slackening. So this is how it gets aroused. So we start to see that when we have the arising and passing away of suffering and we want to get out of it, we know that we need to make effort. Like we've been making effort to do this contemplation. We've been making effort to do this contemplation in terms of Kayanupassana. And we've been making effort now at the first right striving that we don't want the central thoughts, that we've seen the true nature of this physical nutriment, that we've seen the rising and passing away, and all we get is suffering. And so we're saying we don't want sensual thoughts, we don't want ill thoughts, we don't want harming or cruel thoughts. And so we don't want any unskilled states that come from those thoughts, whether it's through speech or mind or body. And because we know it takes us away from the bojjhangas, we know it takes us away from the noble path. So this one is really preventing that. And so this is how we arouse the enlightenment factor of energy. Now, when it comes to the piti sambojjhanga, as I was saying before, it gets aroused when we enter into the jhanas, and also when we heavily go into Dibba Vihara, the heavenly abiding. What the Buddha says in the Sila Sutta is, when energy is aroused, there arises in us rapture free of sensuality. So when we attain to any of the jhana concentrations, we develop this piti sambojjhanga, this enlightenment factor of rapture. And as a result of that, what we're really saying is that because the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is there, because the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma is there, because the enlightenment factor of energy is there, we get this enlightenment factor of rapture. All of those bojjhangas help. It's part of this Dhamma niyama. So each stage helps that. So at this stage, we have four enlightenment factors. Now, when it comes to passaddhi sambojjhanga, what it says is when our mind is uplifted, so this is from the Sila Sutta, when our mind is uplifted by rapture, the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. And so this is what arouses the enlightenment factor of tranquility. And in certain suttas, I think when we went through the Sila Sutta, Buddha calls the passaddhi sambojjhanga, this tranquility enlightenment factor, as some kind of provisional security that we have. It gives us some kind of security over our mind, that it can't be attacked from sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, harming thoughts, and other unskilled states. Now, if we've reinforced our understanding of the noble truth of suffering, which we did here, and we have this mind that understands birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, and we see the lies and deception that we have taken before over sensual pleasures, and we're not going to take those lies and deception again. So we know our mind is not going to be imbued with unskilled states. So when we make that determination for truth and we have the desire for nibbana, that is where we start to arouse the enlightenment factor of tranquility, because we desire nibbana, something that's undeceptive, that is free of suffering. That's where we start to arouse it. So it's not fully developed, but it's starting to be aroused. Those are the component parts, because that's where our body really becomes more tranquil, that the mind becomes tranquil when we start to reach this concentration due to desire. Then when we look at this samadhi sambojjhanga, so the enlightenment factor of concentration, what the Buddha says in the Sila Sutta is, for one whose body is tranquil and who is happy, the mind becomes concentrated. And I've said before, you're doing this meditation correctly, having contemplated like all these things about correcting the perception, seeing something repulsive or unattractive and realizing actually, hey, that's the wrong view. And then seeing the arising and passing away of the physical nutriment and or form, and realizing, hey, it only leads to suffering. And then reinforcing that with the third level of Metta House, saying, yes, what we get is really suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. And realizing we've been lied to, that we've lied to ourselves from birth to birth. And so we concentrate on nibbana. So the mind gets happy because we contemplate suffering. I mean, that's the amazing thing. You're getting the meditation right if you contemplate this suffering and the mind gets happy, that it wants nibbana, the desires for nibbana, something that does not go to suffering, something that is safe. So when we understand that we are bound to suffering because we crave something that we've misapprehended, like the physical nutriment, this form, however we've taken sensual pleasures, so bodies, food, what have you, and we understand that birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, we see the arising and passing away, phenomena, then we realize, yes, we have this enlightenment factor of concentration aroused. It's starting to develop. The only one left is the enlightenment factor of equanimity. So upekkha sambojjhanga. So in the Sila Sutta, the Buddha says, he closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. And that's how upekkha sambojjhanga is aroused. So you think about it. We have this chanda samadhi, concentration due to desire for nibbana. That's our protection. And we have the security guard because of the indriya samvara. And the mind is very concentrated towards nibbana. Now, when we have this concentration and we're now contemplating the impermanence, so what we've taken as permanent before to come into this birth, and we don't want to be doing it again because we've contemplated, the mind becomes even more concentrated because it has direct knowledge now or insight into impermanence. So the other one had direct insight into the lies about pleasure, about the taking something as attractive, as pleasing, as beautiful, as well as having taken something as pleasurable when it's suffering. So now we have the insight or the direct knowledge into impermanence, that there is no permanency. We've misapprehended again. So we get to this upekkha sambojjhanga. It arises and it develops as a result because we realize we don't want this physical nutriment. It's a problem for us. We don't want to take this physical nutriment, this body of ours or any other bodies as ours. It's not mine. It's not me and mine. And so what we actually see when we look at our concentration is there no blemishes or corruptions in our meditation. And so that's how, with this equanimity enlightenment factor, we reach liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So it's a really beautiful meditation. So having understood that, so circling back and seeing how the meditation itself and how the enlightenment factors get aroused and developed, and from the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, they can be all active. And I'll go into more about that. But what we understand from this, everything we've meditated on to build this house, and think of the peak, like the peak of the roof is the bojjhangas, right? Having developed these bojjhangas, that we're developing these bojjhangas and they're active. We've developed this metta house, 3 levels, however many levels, and the peak is the rafters on the roof. We understand what we've contemplated is not just our predicament. It's the predicament of all living beings in the world, in all realms of existence. So all we did was we contemplated the true nature of the physical nutriment. It's unattractive, it's foul, it's displeasing. We've seen the rising and passing away phenomena. So we've understood that we want to stop dependent origination, because what does our craving do? It leads us to more and more suffering. And we've also understood the noble truth of suffering. There's no long-lasting pleasure. It's actually suffering in the bigger predicament. It's deceiving us. So what does that mean? We don't covet another physical form. So there's no sensual desire. So if there's no sensual desire, there's no ill will. So this is what the Buddha means, that when we go to liberation of the mind by loving kindness with the bojjhangas, there's no ill will. So we have direct insight into this impermanence, and we're not holding on to this fragile, death-bound physical nutriment, this form that we've taken as sensual pleasure. So when you see that, you see at the level of liberation, it's flawless. But if you can maintain the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, which is flawless, it's a wonderful thing. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to say, just as an aside, is if we don't even talk about loving kindness, but even if we just develop liberation through this kind of step, like being able to see and correct up until this point of impermanence, it's also possible to see every form in this way, that it has this impermanent nature, and that all it does is it leads to suffering over and over again. Like when we have the bojjhangas lifted in this way, we can also reach a very similar liberation that isn't imbued with loving kindness, but it's called desireless liberation. So mettācetovimutti, like if we have that strong desire for nibbana rather than the physical nutriment, rather than coming back to another form, then we reach that mettācetovimutti. So that's also possible. Loving kindness comes in is when we contemplate about all living beings, and when we contemplate that we want all living beings to be free from enmity, from this hatred or hostility, that we want them to have supreme security of nibbana, supreme happiness or bliss of nibbana. That's where the loving kindness comes in. It becomes liberation by loving kindness. So it's 7:15 over here. We've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes. And I wanted to talk about the fortification of loving kindness through the bojjhangas. And I think it's worthwhile to do it. I may go over the hour and a half thing. It might be a little longer, and I think it's worth doing it because it just makes it seamless in terms of fortifying our metta practice. So I'm going to do that. We won't do a meditation this particular session. Maybe what I'll do is we'll do a meditation in our next session and reinforce what we've gone through this session as a meditation. There's a lot here, and I would suggest really do the homework, really look at this, because I don't think it's a hard meditation. I actually think it just takes practice, and it takes some contemplation and also effort, and just adhering to the Buddha's pathway, adhering to the instructions. So that's my encouragement. You don't have to do homework, but that's my encouragement. So what I wanted to talk through is this comes from the Patisambhidamagga, and this is attributed to Venerable Sariputta, and it's called the Path of Discrimination or Path of Analysis, Textual Analysis. It's very good because it's like a compendium of all the wisdom and knowledge that Venerable Sariputta has attained and realized, and how he's analyzed. It really helps us. And so with this particular thing, it's in the Metta Kata, so the section on Metta, and it's talking about liberation of the mind by loving kindness and how it's fortified by the 7 factors of enlightenment. So how can we maintain our liberation of mind by Metta through these bojjhangas? So it takes what I just explained about the bojjhangas further. There's certain things, like if we're in the liberation of mind by loving kindness, it helps us to take it further, to maintain it more, because it becomes really supported by active bojjhangas. So here, fortified, like this word here, fortified, the Buddha has, or Venerable Sariputta has used this word paribhavita. So bhavita we know as development. So it's more developed, fortified, trained, or supported, or penetrated. So that's the word that Venerable Sariputta is talking about. Apologies for that thing. So let's look at each one. So the first one is the sati sambojjhanga, so the mindfulness enlightenment factor. Venerable Sariputta says, when he establishes mindfulness, sati upatapati, thus let all living beings be free from enmity, safe and blissful. Then liberation of the mind by loving kindness is fortified by this mindfulness enlightenment factor. So if we don't see the physical nutriment or form correctly, so if we don't establish our mindfulness on the form correctly, then what happens is we start to have this covetousness towards the form. So it's like, I want it to be mine. I want this food to be mine. I want other people's bodies to be mine. I want this particular body at the point of death. I want another one. So when we covet, what that leads to is sensual desire. We've seen that in the physical nutriment pathway. And so all we get from sensual desire is ill will. So that would block metta. So if we see the physical nutriment correctly, so we see as unattractive, we see the arising and passing away as a further development, then we establish this mindfulness. And in that way, that's how our metta is supported. The second one is when he discriminates with wisdom, panyaya pavichinati, Thus, let all beings be free from enmity, safe and blissful. Then liberation of the mind by loving kindness is fortified by the investigation of Dhamma, enlightenment factor. So here, when we don't understand fully the arising and passing away phenomena of this physical nutriment or the form, so people, food, etc., then what we have is delusion. Like we're completely deluded by the physical form or the physical nutriment or form. And in that way, it blocks metta because we would allow sensual desire to arise with this delusion and we would keep going with it. And so that would block metta. Now, every living being, if we contemplate every living being, when they don't properly investigate, like if they haven't been taught about samudaya thangama, the rising and passing away phenomena, that the result in the bigger picture is actually suffering, that the whole mass of suffering is all we get from this physical nutriment or form, then all these living beings are with delusion. So what does that mean? That means they're bound to samsara, bound to birth, bound to this whole mass of suffering. So you can see when we discriminate with wisdom, we wish from that level that we don't want beings to be with the hatred and ill will. We want them to find supreme safety and bliss of nibbana. And then the third one is when he exerts energy, viryang paganhati. Thus, let all living beings be free from enmity, safe and blissful. Then liberation of the mind by loving kindness is fortified by the energy enlightenment factor. So we know when we don't apply effort or energy to this inside pathway, then unskilled states arise. If we don't apply energy, then we don't get to the first jhana. If we don't apply energy, we don't get to Dibba Vihara, the heavenly abode. If we don't apply energy, we don't protect the mind from more unskilled states, unprofitable perceptions, all of it. And then we don't develop the noble path. But if we do exert energy and we don't backslide, we don't slacken off, it prevents the mind from falling sick. So it prevents the mind from falling away from the profitable perception of unattractiveness, of displeasing, of ugly or repulsive. It prevents the mind from falling back into craving for the physical nutriment and not comprehending suffering, thinking that there's permanent pleasure. So things like that, it's really important, this exerting energy, because when we see that, we realize all living beings, not knowing this, they're not free from, they're in danger. So you can see it fortifies our metta towards all living beings. And then the fourth one, when he tranquilizes burning, parilaham patipasambeti. Thus, let all living beings be free from enmity, safe and blissful. Then liberation of the mind by loving kindness is fortified by the happiness, or in this case, the rapture, enlightenment factor. We've been calling it rapture. I don't know why this says happiness right now. I think this is the translation, Bhikkhu Nyanamoli's translation from Patisambhilamaka, but it's rapture that we've been referring to. So the piety sambojjhanga. So parilaha here is like burning. It's also translated as fever or passion. So we know when we go with the sensual pleasures based on physical nutriment or form, then we have passion towards it as it escalates. We have a fever towards it. We start to burn wanting those things. So when you think about if we strongly desire another person with lust, then we start burning with that passion. And same with even for food, when we are really addicted to certain foods, then it burns within us. We really must have it. So when we have that sensual desire, and Buddha talks about this actually in the Mahasalayatana Sutta, that householders or lay people, we normally go towards sensual pleasures. But what the Buddha recommends is to replace that with jhanas, because that's the kind of safe pleasure or happiness that one can get that doesn't require the physical form. It's something that the mind constructs, and it's much safer because it is leaning towards nibbana. It is part of right concentration on the noble path. So when we look at this, So that's parilaha. And then patipassamviti is tranquilizing. And Buddha uses this quite a lot. And Venerable Sariputta is using it in this context as tranquilizing, calming, easing, allaying. So we know that when we burn towards the physical nutriment, the form, then we misapprehend and we have the perversion, the corruption in the mind. So it leads us to have all these sensual desires, and it keeps escalating and escalating. And so this blocks the metta, because we know that sensual pleasures based on the physical nutrimental form are subject to change, subject to decay, aging. And so ill will arise and sadness. So it's not a good thing. So we know it would block, we would fall from our metta practice. So here, when we arouse the piti sambojjhanga and we concentrate on that, that actually tranquilizes any burning for sensual pleasures. So if we have rapture, this piti, then there's no burning, there's no fever, there's no passion in that wrong sense. So rapture far exceeds the pleasure we get from sensual pleasures. And we recognize that when we're in Dibba Vihara, we recognize that. And even when we go to Chanda Samadhi, we recognize that. When we are in the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, we also recognize it. It's very stable. So 3 more. So the 5th one is when he tranquilizes moral corruption. Duttulang pati pasambeti. Thus, let all living beings be free from enmity, safe and blissful. Then liberation of the mind by loving kindness is fortified by tranquility, enlightenment factor. Here, Duttulang has been translated, I put it as moral corruption. It's also appearing as depravity and also wickedness. So when we have wickedness in our mind, like unskilled states, and what we're doing with this pasadi sambojjhanga, this tranquility enlightenment factor. So we know from our development of metta, even karaniya metta, we know that what obstructs any of the Brahma Viharas, including metta, are the defilements. And we've particularly emphasized derogation, makkha, envy, issa, disparaging or divisiveness, which is palasa, and also stinginess, which is macharya. And so we know that these things, they're the things that have holes in our metta bucket. They block the metta. And when they arise due to the physical nutriment. We take certain things as me and mine, and therefore we have derogation, disparaging, envy, stinginess, because of the form, because of our attachment to physical nutriment or form. We take it as mine. So knowing that, when we understand the true nature of this physical nutriment, when we understand the arising and passing away nature of the physical nutriment, that all we get is suffering, and we recognize the importance of not having unskilled states, and we understand that there is this noble truth of suffering, so birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, we don't allow derogation, disparaging or divisiveness, envy or stinginess, because we have direct knowledge and insight. We don't take this physical form as me and mine. And so we give up these defilements, these mental corruptions. And because we're no longer burning with them, that's what it means that it's tranquilized. And so that's how we're able to wish all living beings to be free of enmity, to be safe and blissful. It's because we've not taken it as me and mine, we're not harnessing any of these moral corruptions or mental corruptions, it's possible for us to wish and maintain that metta. And then the 6th one is when he concentrates the mind, cittang samadhahati. Thus, let all living beings be free from enmity, safe and blissful. Then liberation of the mind by loving kindness is fortified by the concentration enlightenment factor. So here the Buddha is really, or Venerable Sariputta is really talking about concentration. And really here samadhahati is really concentration or composing the mind or stabilizing. So it's very stable, something that we can't fall from. So having developed to this degree, we're not leaning towards the physical nutriment any longer. So as we said, our chanda samadhi is leaning towards nibbana. So we're away from samsara. Because if we lean towards the physical nutriment, not having understood properly the form, not having properly understood that the result is always suffering, then it is a block for metta, because we would take it as me and mine, and we would fall. We would desire samsara again. So in this way, when we've reinforced and it desires for nibbana, we don't allow the mind to fall back. So the concentration is really concentrating on the fact that, okay, we've reached this degree. Our mind is concentrated. We're not going to allow any moral corruptions, any mental defilements to come back again. So no derogation, no disparaging, no envy, no stinginess. We're not going to allow it. The mind is protected. We're securing it like a fortress. And then the last one is when he discriminates defilements with knowledge. Jnanena kilese patisankati. Thus, let all living beings be free from enmity, safe and blissful. Then liberation of the mind by loving kindness is fortified by equanimity, enlightenment factor. So the Pali here is jnanam kilese patisankati. So again, we have this discrimination. It's another kind of discrimination that we have contemplated. We have insight through our knowledge. So we have some kind of direct knowledge, which we can see when we've gone all the way through the painful practice with slow realization, all the way up to guarding our chanda samadhi, our concentration due to desire, and we contemplate impermanence. Certain insights are there that we've highlighted. We understand the physical nutriment, the true nature. We understand the rising and passing away phenomena, which gives us wisdom. We're not going to fall for it, the lies and deceptions. We fully, completely looked at birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. So we're really with that the result is suffering. It's not good for us. It's not good for any of us. So this equanimity, when we look at it, we don't have any equanimity. We realize we don't have equanimity if we still take the physical form as attractive, if we take it as pleasing, if we take it as beautiful, if we like it, right? So there's no equanimity. We clearly know that. And we also clearly know it if we don't see its impermanent nature, its suffering nature, that is subject to change. And it's not worth taking as me and mine. So having seen that, right? Having seen that with discrimination, if we see the truth, if we're free of all those lies, then we realize we don't want this physical nutriment. There's no gain that we can have from this physical nutriment. In our past birth, we grasped onto the physical nutriment, and what do we get? Aging, sickness, and death. Here we are again in this lifetime. What are we getting again in this lifetime? Aging, sickness, and death. And so equanimity, enlightenment factor, is what helps here, because we detach from the physical form. We realize, I'm not going to take this as me and mine. It's suffering. It's impermanent. It's subject to change. I don't want this. And we realize all other living beings are in that same predicament. They don't realize the impermanent nature. They don't realize the suffering nature. They don't realize subject to change. They don't realize the true nature of the physical nutriment. In most people's cases or other beings, they would think, there, let me have another one. And so that's where we wish from. Let all living beings be free from enmity. Let all beings find the supreme safety of Nibbana, supreme bliss of Nibbana. And so that's how we fortify the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, by these 7 factors of enlightenment. Sabe satta averino hontu, kemino hontu, sukino hontu. So that's what we keep saying in our meditation, in the liberation of the mind by loving kindness. I was going to do a short meditation, but we've reached an hour and a half or over it. So I think we'll save the meditation for next session. But I encourage to practice meditation on this particular insight pathway for this week. At least lightly go through it or intensely go through it if you can. Revise the steps, write it down, have some questions, send them in if you wish. Happy to answer them. And then next week, we'll do a revision. And what I hope to do is actually start to look at the next part of the sutta, which goes on to say about how we view repulsive and unrepulsive in 5 different ways. And as I said in last session, I want to use Venerable Sariputta as our role model for how he sees things, because the examples that are given for him are really illuminating and will really help us to penetrate this Dhamma and to see also the ins and outs of our liberation of the mind by loving kindness. Let's now pay gratitude to the Triple Gem. Gratitude to the Buddha, gratitude to the Dhamma, and gratitude to the Noble Sangha. Gratitude to all the noble beings who've helped us with this Dhamma. We can also pay gratitude to any past teachers, our parents, anyone who's helped us on this Dhamma path, and anyone who's currently helping us on this Dhamma path. If you'd like to dedicate any merit to departed relatives, you can do so now. And we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem to all of you. Wishing you well. Teruan Saranai.